Optimism, Entrepreneurship, and the American Dream, today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wick. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs reporting on local ecosystems in lots of different political environments. And this show is meant to be about local ecosystem building. Bumps into a bunch. I was very interested recently finishing a book that talked about two myths of American identity. One, that all is good, and one, all is bad. And the author argued that the American myth, neither of those American myths is entirely true. That the United States, like any reigning superpower, is a complicated place. Lots of good, lots of bad. I'm with three friends who navigate this in a lot of different environments, and we're going to talk about how to do it. I want to hear how they view optimism in the American dream and how entrepreneurship relates. So we're going to talk about that with Maria Underwood, chairperson TechBirmingham, Victor Hwang of Right to Start, and Brackeen of Lightship Capital. Guys, thanks for being here for our monthly chat on such a challenging topic.
Thanks for having us, as always, Chris.
A real pleasure, Chris.
Always. All right, Victor, I need you to help center us because I got the pleasure to be at your launch event for the America the Entrepreneurial initiative. Got to write about it. You take a very optimistic tone because I was there. I saw you. I heard you talk about your optimism. Can you talk a bit about America the Entrepreneurial, the program, reintroduce what you're doing with it, and what it speaks about your view of optimism in the United States coming toward its 250th anniversary?
Sure. Well, thank you for coming to the launch. So just a couple of weeks ago in Indianapolis at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, we launched America the Entrepreneurial, which is a campaign to revive and reignite the entrepreneurial spirit in America all across this land in celebration of our 250th birthday. So 2026, as most people, maybe not everybody knows yet, but is America's 250th birthday. And I'm old enough to remember America's 200th birthday. And I do know one of the things that happens during these types of birthday years is there's a questioning of who are we as a country and where are we headed? And it really struck me that we can't get through this, this 250th birthday without really thinking about the entrepreneurial spirit in America and thinking about the importance of that, because we know that when the entrepreneurial spirit is strong, then the country is strong, that it's the source of jobs, the source of growth, the source of fighting poverty, the source of fighting inequality. All the good things in life, in prosperity, come from strong entrepreneurship. And so we got a chance now with this 250 to really put entrepreneurship front and center in the American story and really get people talking about it, our goal is to have 250,000 Americans involved in the 250th birthday, talking about entrepreneurship, helping revive entrepreneurship, putting it front and center in American civic life again. So that's the idea. And I guess I'm long-term optimistic in America because this is a country that always finds a way to rejuvenate itself, even when things don't seem to be going right or when things are divided. This country's been through much, much worse. It's been through, very difficult things in its life. And I think it's got this ability to self-regenerate. And 2026, America's 250th is a chance to do that. So America the Entrepreneurial, we're looking for everybody to come join and participate.
Victor, we're going to come back to that. But Brian, as my dear friend, I throw the biggest grenades at you always. We talked a bit. I am a journalist. I tried to follow the polling data. And if you look at it in a lot of contexts, confidence in the American economy, consumer confidence, and a lot of other metrics, there sometimes does look like two different U.S. narratives. A little more than a third of Americans would say, what are you talking about? Of course, I'm deeply optimistic. And a little more than a third of Americans would say, what are you talking about? I'm deeply pessimistic. And that kind of in that group, neither chunk could possibly fathom the other half. And you are someone who I admire because I've seen you work both kinds of rooms that would say, what are you talking about? It's great. And rooms that would say, what are you talking about? Everything's going to hell. So I guess I'm kind of curious at this moment, Brian, how do you navigate those rooms? Are you changing how you talk? Do you sound more optimistic in one room than another? How thermostatic are you in discussing such matters?
So I'm very optimistic, but I'm also empathetic, right? And so the rooms are completely different, and they're also very, very concentrated. So for instance, sometimes I'm in an all-black room. Sometimes I'm in a room in certain sections of an urban area. Sometimes I'm in a really rural area in the South or the Midwest, right? And everyone in that room is usually the same as every other person. And the groupthink is really spins. And narratives become facts, right? And facts become values, right? Like this is right? And it just kind of like courses through the person's veins. This is where I lean on my gift of autism, right? So I have a very limited emotional range, and I'm very data focused, right? And the data would tell you, if you're not a politics person, if you were just like turn off your Fox News, your MSNBC, or CNN, and only focus on just the economic numbers, the only conclusion you could come to is that we're in a good economic environment, surprisingly, possibly, right? And that it's improving, right? The fact that we didn't lower interest rates in a tariff environment and the economy still grows and jobs are still growing tells you a lot about the resiliency of the current economy. And that's worthy of optimism.
All right. I'll come back in a second, pushing a couple of these. But Maria, something that you and I have talked about, what has always drawn me to this work of entrepreneurship and what I know is economic development, I've always liked that I would be forced into very different rooms. Kind of traditional economic development was classically bastion of conservative politics, and ecosystem building kind of got a lot of its language from kind of progressive coalition building. And I liked, as a journalist, as a news organization, having to work in those different rooms and find commonality. And entrepreneurship tended to be a version of that. I guess I'm curious, does that still feel like a strength? How are you navigating very different rooms that talk and think very differently about the moment we're in?
Yeah, I think, so I agree with what Brian's saying if you just look at data. But I think that if you're looking at entrepreneurship in particular, which can be a really personal job or a personal coming into, you look at the mental health of entrepreneurs, you look at social crises coming down the pike from government, from decisions being made, kind of where we are in America at this moment. And then if you look at it from a regional perspective as well, the data is not the same throughout the country in terms of how the economy is doing or how people are going to be recruited to your city or state. As you know, it's always been hard to recruit to Alabama for lots of reasons because of stereotypes. But as the government kind of pushes decisions down to the state level more, and then certain states start to make their own decisions, it's going to continue to be harder for ecosystems like ours, who have been growing for years and been this welcoming, really community-based entrepreneur system, for a lot of our startups to keep staying here. I was trying to recruit, and we had a Birmingham house at South by Southwest 2 years ago, and it was a month after all the IVF bills in Alabama got passed. We're losing doctors, we're losing med students, we're losing entrepreneurs who don't want to build companies here because they, as women or their employees, may not get the health care or the reproductive rights they need. So yes, the economy may be fine overall as like a whole. If we're looking at just stats, I think that certain ecosystems are going to have a harder time going into this political environment.
All right. Let me channel two versions of trolls, commenters, emailers that I get. Because that way I can say, look, I played out both versions of this. So I'll play out both versions of it. So version one, I watch this and I say, you four are normalizing fascism. You got to be kidding me that you're not talking about constitutional overreach, bombs in the sky, anti-science. Like, you guys are crazy that you're not talking about this and you could have any regard of optimism. If I'm in the comments or I'm emailing me after this saying, how dare I normalize this moment? If someone comes up to one of you at an event and says, how could you not be speaking out at this moment? How dare you say you're optimistic? What Victor, I'm sure you must be speaking at some event and someone could come up to you and say, Victor, you are normalizing fascism. You're crazy. What's your stance in that moment? And we should say now, actually, you're in a hotel lobby in Osaka where Builders Live now has a dual office. and so that's some background music we have now for the moment. And it's 1 a.m.
This
so
is
thank you
the
for
hotel lobby at 1 a.m. in Osaka, and this is live street view of Osaka.
Inspiring.
It is. Look, entrepreneurship, the system, I think the thing that unites Americans, one of the only issue, the only major economic issue that unites Americans is the belief that everyone deserves their shot to be an entrepreneur and to be able to start and build their own thing. The entrepreneurial opportunity should be broadly writ and should be widely accessible. This is from a bipartisan poll that we did at Right to Start. We found that 94% of Americans believe this is important to the future of America. And so the system, so we know that's true, that Americans believe that. We also know, and we did data on this, that Americans broadly believe that the system makes it too hard to be an entrepreneur right now. And that it really assigns, we also know there's other data that shows that at least 50% of Americans believe the American dream is no longer within reach. And so there's this real sense that the American dream is dying. And so we focus on what still pulls us together, which is the belief in the entrepreneurial spirit, the belief that everyone should be able to have that, and also the belief that the system really holds back all Americans from being able to do that properly. Then we can find a point of unity that actually pulls us forward again. And I think that's a big part of the issue, is that a lot of the debate in America is about what we don't agree on, and all the things that all the buzzwords and the polarizing narratives and the wedge issues that pull us apart. And we cannot pull out of that without finding what we do agree on and rewriting a narrative and reconstituting a set of beliefs and principles based on what we do believe. And I think at the very core, America it was the most courageous startup idea of its time. Not perfect by any means, but if you look at the original promise and how that has been transmitted over the centuries, that original promise is still very, very viable. And it still pulls people and makes people believe deeply in what that promise is. Whether or not you agree or disagree with what America is at the moment, you believe in the entrepreneurial promise of America, regardless. And that is something that's very widely held.
Maria, Brian, I have been called naive for many reasons. And one of them is that my first introduction to how you do coalition building, to collective action more generally, was you got to focus on what you agree on to build the coalition, and you go there. And within reason, you step behind what you disagree with. It does feel like one of the ways we've ratcheted up this moment in American life, the last 5 to 10 years, has been because we've traded that in for a purity test on a lot of sides of we focus very much on what we disagree with as opposed to what we agree on. Do I sound naive, old, and unfashioned? How do you guys navigate the balance between, am I focusing on what we agree on, or am I focusing on what we disagree on?
Well, let's be clear. The algorithm focuses on what not you and not
well
us,
said.
Right? Because you don't feel that way on Pinterest. You don't feel that way, right? On more positive platforms, right? But you get on different platforms, and that's what's being fed to you.
I want to hit on that, but Maria, yeah, that Brian, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that on the social side for sure. I think on the entrepreneurship side, it's interesting because there are a lot of really great organizations and resources who are supporting and investing in entrepreneurs, startups, small businesses. Right to Start is obviously one of the good ones out there doing this great work. I think there's also this other side of the startup space in particular that's, it's not new, but it's more of a entrepreneurship for the sake of LinkedIn fame or working to create viral content more than working to build something that impacts community. Fighting for venture capital. The disparity in venture capital between white male founders and basically everyone else is still wild, even though we've been talking about it and working on it for years. And the interesting part of that for me is that mostly if you have a woman entrepreneur, most of the time her company has a higher purpose or some greater good, or they're building for a purpose. Whereas you'll see a lot of men in kind of that a different space that's focused on B2B SaaS or something. So the dichotomy between what you're building for and how much funding you get is really stark. Creates a lot of competition. So in that way, you are focusing more on what's different from you, like how you're being divided. Or you're seeing who can be the most viral on LinkedIn over who has a product that's going to help us get back to this really good, rich entrepreneurship space that's going to help us have another 250 years in this country. So I think I kind of answered on both sides, but I think there's a little bit of both of those things at play.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems like one of the big questions, maybe linger for a sec on what you said in social platforms. I have like a hobby point on that too. Like I have somewhere in my gut that it feels like a generation from now, the dissection of our moment will be that we were at war with foreign agents using spam bots turning us against each other more than we totally realize now. And that like dead internet theory kind of logic that when you look at the polling data, as you so often cite, Victor, and I think maybe all four of us do some version of this. Maybe I'll speak for myself. Dissonance I have is I feel like I get yelled at on the internet, emails, but then I will look at survey data and just in my experience talking to actual people in lots of different communities, rural, urban, different backgrounds, I'm like, I sure do keep feeling like we share a lot in common. Why am I getting yelled at so much on the internet about such extreme things? And it does feel like we have a little bit of data already that it does feel like the platforms and the war we don't realize we've been fighting with. Instead of a Cold War, we've had a digital war under our feet. Brian, how much do you think about that a lot? Of like, did the sleeper cell already take place and it turned us against us in a way that Victor and so much of these efforts are trying to bring us back to something different?
100%. I agree.
It's way more. Even if you take the most liberal view, it's 10 times more than that, right? Like, there's a lot of.
What's 10 times more than that? Say to clarify that.
Even if you think that bots are like 1 out of every, let's say 3, it's probably 30.
I see.
Right? Like a lot of bot tracking platforms. But the point of that is moving the American electorate different directions has a huge impact on other people, and it's so cheap to do so, right? You can spend so little to create these bots, and then the incentives are all misaligned. So if you're a platform, you want to show user growth so you can get your next round, right? And so what do? You don't use CAPTCHAs, you let people on, you flood the system with bots, right? And then you say, oh, look at me, I created this amazing, huge platform. In reality, it's bot driven, but then you're just feeding poison to your fellow Americans.
I think there's this really tough circle right now, specifically on LinkedIn, some on Instagram too, but I'm seeing it more on LinkedIn, where the louder the founder on LinkedIn about what's happening, whether or not it's a little fabricated or not, the more successful that company is seen, the more funding they're going to get, whether or not the books and the customers are behind those LinkedIn posts. I found in working with founders that the quieter ones had the better businesses and were actually in the work every day, but they're not the ones that people knew about or believed in because they hadn't seen it validated on social media. And then they had a harder time raising money. So we've got to walk this, like the investor community, the people who support startups have to really be able to see through, somebody posting on LinkedIn because they think they have to get visibility versus somebody doing it because they want to share, a really true milestone that's valuable. I think we see that through our politics as well, but I think it's getting really dangerous in that entrepreneurship space of everyone feeling like they have to be an influencer entrepreneur or they won't get funding. And quite frankly, a lot of times it's true.
All right. How about I try to walk us back to the work that brings us together, which is a kind of place-based or local ecosystem building, economic development work. But I think the tension we're at, or at least what I feel, and maybe you guys could help me here, what has drawn me to local journalism my entire career, what I find inspiring about ecosystem building, what I believe in for place-based economic development has been what I thought a big part of the American narrative was a degree of local control has tended to let local people solve local problems, and let the cultural nuances play out, and that people are going to look a little different, sound a little different. And there is one narrative in the political science, nerd alert, that as you lose some of the local media and more focus on national media, we all started hating each other also there too, because we don't actually talk all the same. So when you only have one voice, kind of national narrative, it doesn't sound right to local context. And that's why we just like local media, because you need a little bit of on the ground sense of things. So I guess what I'm trying to wind up to for like the last little bit of time I have with you, maybe 10 or so minutes with you guys before I want to move to the final point. How are you guys balancing, and maybe Victor, you might be the right one to start with this. Like, your work is both deeply local. You want to talk about state and local governments and the policy level, but you were trying to also build a national coalition. So how do you thread the very, very local with very, very national in a country that in the polling data doesn't always seem to want to be friends together? How are you doing that?
I think, I guess the way I think of it is the concept of from software development of vertical stacks. I think we're missing the vertical stack of the American narrative right now. We have people that are, basically taking parts of that. You have the at the national level, we have narrative wedge issues, buzzwords that really people profit and benefit off of driving us apart, right? You think of a lot of our politicians today, they essentially are in office because they polarize and they raise money off polarization, and they can stay in office and build careers off of getting people angry. But what they do doesn't have the vertical stack of the ideas to actually implement to make lives better, right? A lot of it's just driven by narrative that is not connected to the actual things to be done. And so if I think of the vertical stack, it goes all the way from the national storyline all the way down to the state and local level of what do you actually do to make lives better for people. And that connection point, I think entrepreneurial opportunity, the role of entrepreneurship, the role of how entrepreneurs drive innovation and drive growth from the bottom up, that is the vertical stack that's missing in American life right now. And that's why I think America the Entrepreneurial is so important, because it provides what may be the core vertical stack of American life, which is how do you actually empower people to build value from the bottom up in society. And if we can rebuild that vertical stack, I'm saying this because I'm assuming this is a geeky enough audience to understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And you can actually provide a way to bring this country back again, right? Which is to say, what do we agree on? Let's start with core principles and rebuild from the bottom back up.
Maria, Brian, how are you balancing deeply local, state, national identities?
Brian, you want me to go first?
I'm really curious about your answer, actually. Yeah.
I think I say this probably every time we all talk about the dichotomy of being from Alabama and Birmingham, how we look at priorities and policies. We have a statewide organization that focuses on helping all cities and all entrepreneurs across the state of Alabama become successful, invest in them. We have accelerators through Generator and Techstars here. We have all of that support. I think the challenge is getting people to look past sometimes, how they feel about Alabama politically, and then look at what Alabama has to offer in the tech space and the entrepreneur support system. And things like how we have more, we're one of the most biologically diverse states. We've got more in Birmingham, more green space per capita than any other city our size. It's like, how do you get someone to look at that and not just how you're represented in the news? And in terms of how we work on a state level, because we have this really incredible organization, Innovate Alabama, that does advocate and support on behalf of entrepreneurs, and has a lot of funding from the federal government that's trickled down through their organization. There is a seat at the table for tech in Alabama. It's way behind where it is in California or where maybe in Austin, but we're getting there and we're building, and there's a focus on it. So it's this constant battle between how we're perceived by the rest of the country and how internally in the state we're fighting for ourselves and for our entrepreneurs. So There's not a right way to do it. And sometimes our lawmakers don't work with us on things that should be really easy to support for entrepreneurs, or for people to grow their businesses here, or to stay here, or to raise their families while they're building their businesses. But there's a renewed effort for it. So that is where my optimism is that there's a renewed effort for more alignment in the state. I'll leave it at that.
And to be clear, I don't think you'd find anyone, maybe in any democracy anywhere, that would say they didn't feel some version of what you just said.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll set that aside. Two things, maybe reset, and you guys might have reactions too. So part of the timing, this is going to run around, the piece will run on July 4th. We just came off Juneteenth. In this moment, I think I'm always thinking about how, as a news organization, we're supposed to present, but I also think of myself as an individual. How do I want to feel? I have a friend who kind of teases me that he and I used to do road trips for years, all in our 20s, and I had this backpack that I stitched an American flag on, and we went to around the world, around the country, and we always talked about how you showed up in a place and the identity, and we talked a lot about that. And he's part of this kind of group of friends we have of very different politics, and that text thread drives me nuts, but is also one of the best and most important things in my life, because they're the first ones I yell at. I don't yell on social media. I tend to yell at these friends, and we yell at each other, and I sometimes find I'm just wrong. And it's very different with friends to be wrong than in a public place, where once you dig in your heels, you then suddenly you just can't go back, because you've done it in front of the people. And so now you'll find reasons to reinforce your belief because you said it publicly. And something different with friends, where you still get made fun of or trolled or ripped on with your friends, but it's a very different dynamic to back down among friends. And there's like a little case story that I think about, that we lose some of that when we just don't let people kind of navigate. And I worry so much how we just decide a thing, and then it doesn't matter. As we know, it does not matter what the data says, as you said, Brian. Like, the data is truly irrelevant, because I've already decided how I feel, and there's no data you can present me that will change that opinion.
I mean,
that worries me.
I left DC and came back to the South. I was in DC.
Yeah.
I was in D. Oh, sorry.
No, go. Please go ahead. I just missed the first part of what you said.
Yeah, no, I was in DC for 10 years and moved back home because I was there. I left in 2019. And the echo chamber that became, I was working at an international women's organization in DC. There are a lot of diverse things about that city. The one thing that was real loud in the first 3 years of the first Trump administration was like, you're never mad enough, you're never angry enough, you're never this. And I was like, I need to, first of all, if I'm frustrated with things at home and how things are in the state and the city and where we are progressing, I need to go home and be a part of the solution and not just sit up here in a different city and complain about it. But more importantly, I was like, I have friends who won't talk to people who are on the other side of the aisle anymore. Like, it became such an echo chamber. It was dangerous. And I was like, I need to go back home and remember how to be friends with someone across the aisle from me in a way, and have good conversations that bring maybe you not together, but a little closer to each other for something. And I think that's been, I mean, we talked about social earlier, but like my social media, everyone agrees with me because I've unfollowed everyone who doesn't, So it's like, if no matter what reality show I'm watching or who I'm voting for, I'm like, how did this happen? Everyone I know was voting for this person. It's like, no, it's just the people you followed because everyone else pissed you off and you unfollowed them. And I think just to bring it back to news and you, Chris, like the death of local news, however many years ago that started, like that's the beginning of it. We don't have two sides of the story anymore. We don't have to. We can unfollow anything we don't want to agree with. And so now you dig your heels in because you never have a differing opinion. And like the death of local news and the rise of social media at the same time, I think like really, really did us all in that way.
And what I think we all are saying that entrepreneurship is supposed to be is a chance to like, who is focusing on solving problems? Because it seems like when you get lost in your head, you should go back to that. But yeah, I mean, I'm increasingly leery of how I get yelled at. Actually, let me reset one more time and to get your reactions to this. I think if I got pressed real hard on like what worries me about broader macro, like, you know, the Churchill line that democracy is the worst system except for all the others. So like one of my core philosophies is roughly giving people political choices the best system we have. And so roughly that's what I'm prioritizing. I tend to prioritize any concentration of power is bad. So in my reporting, over industry consolidation, problem; over government correction, problem. I want competing forces, and that tends to be my broad philosophy. And I was trained as a journalist that like I'm supposed to be focused more on policy than politics. That let's just see what works. Well, aren't we all on the same team? Shouldn't we just let different states approach entrepreneurship differently and see what plays out? And I know how naive that sounds because I get yelled at about it on the internet, that I sound deeply naive about it. So I guess I wonder, like, any of you guys, have you found like a more, you know, a different way to approach this? Or like, I think my bet right now is I worry more about us seesawing, that those kind of two extremes go to war with each other and the center cannot hold. And I don't mean that centrist politics wise. I mean that like center of a country can't hold. That I think, Victor, you speak so often about history, and I'd love to hear you jump in on this, but I think my read of history is when you start seesawing, that's when you get in trouble. And it's not the first swing of the seesaw that's the risk. You can overcorrect for that first seesaw, because if you overcorrect for the first swing, you then go other way, and then you start, and that's when you lose it. But I wonder how naive I sound about.
There's a difference in seesawing and then adjusting your opinion based on new facts. So I think we also don't allow for people to change their minds or to become more educated and to say something new and different than they've said in the past because they've learned more.
There is something about what I think both Brian and Maria were saying, which is the medium is the message, that old Marshall McLuhan message that the medium is causing polarization. I read something, this was going back to way in college days, where the concept of reason actually emerged in Greece as when the rise of city-states happened. That is when people actually had to come together to form civil society. They actually needed logic and reason to be able to discuss things and actually work through problems. And when you have a society where people put feelings, they kind of decide their feelings first, and then all narrative and logic flows out of feelings, as opposed to using logic to try to wrestle through and, you know, be willing to change your mind. I think that's where a lot of the challenge lies. So how do we get back to a society where we engage with each other, people you may or may disagree with, where the medium actually helps us do that, as opposed to where the medium profits off of driving us apart? I think that's the great challenge, and a great challenge for the technologists of our time, and a great challenge for our leaders, which is to get back to a society where we have to engage and we have to work together, even if we disagree vehemently about stuff. That effectively is where I think most of civil society has been built, because human nature is Zoom is great because it actually is starting to get back to like real human nature. It's like people talking about stuff again, as opposed to people lobbing grenades at each other. And so I have hope. And I think some of the newer mediums, I think if you look at some of the mediums that were most inflammatory, they've become less popular, right? I mean, Twitter is just less popular now because it's kind of not fun to use. And for the very simple reason, whether or not you agree with whatever's said, it's just not fun to use because it's just it's just not constructive. But other mediums, like I think of Zoom as a medium, it's just more fulfilling or more positive, more constructive. So I think human nature, actually Marshall McLuhan said this way back when. He said the question about the medium being the message is whether human nature is able to adapt fast enough, or human culture is able to adapt fast enough to the technology changes that are happening. And I think you see the culture shift, but it takes time, right? It takes time for people to realize that they're getting suckered in by certain mediums. And so it's just a question of how fast we can adapt to that, how fast we can see that we're getting snookered, and how fast we can find a better way to engage with each other.
If I could just jump on that for a second. Social media has to be regulated like utility, right? We created the FCC and broadcast standards because we couldn't have a company telling what people should think all in large swaths, right, of the company. And that went from everything from concentration of ownership to the words you can and can't say on Saturday Night Live, like the F word, and so there's good reason for that. And at this point, YouTube and other platforms are serving up more video than broadcasters. And yet they're not regulated like broadcasters. That's truly insane. And then when you have bipartisan support for outlawing TikTok, you have a Democrat that pushed it off on the next guy, and the Republican that decided not to do it, right? So like, it's not, you can't even find, even in the seesaw, you can't find action on either side, of the seesaw. That's the first big thing. The second big thing, which is more the Philadelphian in me, this 250-year experiment of ours, we call it the American experiment for a reason. It is absolutely experiment. If you wanted to guarantee longevity, we would have a constitutional monarchy, right? Those groups are older than us by far, right? And so we don't know that this experiment is going to work out, and it won't unless we manage it with like the last answer I gave.
So heavy stuff. I want to like turn us to the final close, which I think is the answer to our question of around optimism coming into, this coming off Juneteenth, July 4th, moments of national introspection. Victor's kicking off this campaign to the next 250th anniversary. So I think I'm gonna go to the moment of optimism, but I want to like reset that the stakes that I think we'd be called out on, which are that like there's one version of when you look at history, heterogeneous superpowers, definitionally none has lasted forever, and so there's one sense of like, wouldn't it be the very normal thing to say you kind of like start around a myth that people believe in. That myth is how we develop the modern nation state, and that is how we get it. And then you start tugging those threads enough, you start finding, well, it's a bit of a myth, and then you fall apart. That's one narrative. You're like, and there's a portion of Americans in the poll that say that's what's obviously happening, and there's another that says the world is different now. We've learned more. The institutional systems that have been set up here are stronger. And as Victor alluded to earlier, we've weathered storms before, and so you weather this before. We've had at least a half dozen moments of heightened partisanship in our 250-year history. So, like with those kinds of like two versions, of course, a thing comes to an end, as opposed to like, what are you talking about? Look at all the data. We're so strong. How optimistic are you guys? How will you be celebrating July 4th, 2025? And looking out a year on the 250th anniversary, are you optimistic about the American project?
I feel like we should end on Victor because I think he's the most positive.
Oh, at most, what does that mean about you, Maria? Maria?
I think you always have to be positive, right? Like I think you can't be in the world right now and not retain some sense of hope and positivity, or else you're just.
I think that you would be pushed on that if that's true, Maria. I'm
not finished with my sentence yet, Chris. There was a but.
Fair.
Because what I do see is people organizing more than ever, people building companies that are fixing problems that they see that need to be fixed for other people. Entrepreneurship in the energy space and the clean water space, like there is good out there. I think as a woman who lives in Alabama, who is 4 months away from going to the hospital to give birth with the maternity wards being closed everywhere around me, so it's going to be overcrowded. Last time I barely got medication because the nurses were so overworked with so much overcrowding in hospitals, and there's just so much going on in the world. It's hard to be. And yes, the country has been through something before, but I think at least my generation feels the backslide in a really fast, intense way. So yes, things were bad. Like I wouldn't have been able to vote or have my own credit card, 30 years, 40 years ago. The things that we're seeing happen right now are going backwards at a rapid rate. And I think that is where this kind of fear and it's hard to be positive sets in. So it's not just like, this is hard times for the country, but like, hey, things aren't progressing in the way that they should. On the opposite side of that, there are people digging in again and like working to move things forward. And that's where you have to kind of live in these moments. It's the realism, but also in the like, okay, what can we do as a collective entrepreneurship community, as human race to help kind of push back against this backslide that we're feeling. This is positive as I can make it at the moment.
No, that's beautiful and personal. Thank you for that. Bri?
Optimism is a tough word, but really it's a derivative of your expectation, right? So I'll give the Juneteenth view since we're close to it, and the African American panelist. It was never a big deal growing up in Philly because Pennsylvania and Quakers outlawed slavery in 1780, right? You could always read, write, own businesses, own buildings. My family started a bank. So I find Blacks in the Northeast to be the least optimistic because they have the highest expectation of the full American project. When I go down south and I go other places in the country and there's no expectation, oh, everything's fine, sugar. Have another drink. It's like
to be fair, we do have expectations down south, Brian.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide how to feel about that.
They're lower. They're lower for sure, but there are a few still there.
Holding on to those two, yes. I'm just saying it does. Where you start plays a role, and so going back to our pocket theory, I think that I would love to see raised expectations across the country, because that would come from a greater hope of what's possible and what should be provided.
I worry about being yelled at on either side, but I am optimistic in the American project despite being yelled at both sides. And I think we need more of us who are saying coalition building starts with what we agree on, not what we disagree on. And I just think that's the only thing I've ever learned about collective action. That's my optimism. But Victor, boy, do I look to you in many ways.
Heavy burden. I will say I am, I guess this is what a lot of people say, short-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic. I think short-term, we're in a rough moment. I think you just look at the polarization, you look at you just look at the numbers of inequality, you look at the issues that divide this country, and there, we've got challenges for sure. So I don't want to, brush those under the rug. But I think long term, you have to be optimistic. And I've traveled a lot. I've seen a lot, and so have all of you. America is a country where power flows from the bottom up. It's just designed that way. The people feel like they own the country. Like that is really unlike almost any other place on earth, where people basically feel like they are the shareholders of America. You go to other places and they don't feel like they're shareholders. They feel like they're, they're critics, or they feel like they're bystanders, or they feel like they're passengers. In America, everyone feels like they're a shareholder. And that is a fundamentally different narrative. Again, it all goes to kind of narrative, but that is a very powerful narrative in America. And I think long-term, that tends to right itself, where the shareholders basically, shareholder activism tends to take hold, and it tends to help rework the American project over and over again. So long-term, very hopeful, but it doesn't happen on its own, which is why we've got to take it into our own hands. This is why I think America the Entrepreneurial is important, because it's essentially shareholder activism. It's saying there's a narrative to rewrite, and we have to begin to rewrite it, and we have to rewrite it with first core principles again. So that's where the optimism really flows from.
Are you going to celebrate July 4th, Victor?
Yes, we're going to see. Actually, we're going to see a Dodgers game. The Dodgers have fireworks on July 4th at the stadium, and so we're actually going to have my mother come into town, and we're going to have nieces and the nephews together with extended relatives, all at the Dodgers game. So it's like gonna be a grand old American holiday. So we're gonna celebrate. It'll be fun.
Brian, Maria, are you celebrating July 4th?
I don't have plans yet this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be hot. So just kind of staying cool.
That's what a metaphor.
Maybe I'll write some letters to my politicians in celebration.
All right. I think those are masterful. I'm impressed with the media's happy of all three of you, to be honest. Like expertly done. Victor Hwang, right to start. Brian Brackeen, Lightship Capital, Maria Underwood, TechBirmingham. Thank you guys for a very honest, earnest, and important conversation. Thank you, friends.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye, friend.